an evidence-based solution for effectively navigating screen boundaries that any parent can manage. That's what we're talking about today on the Happy Families podcast, with some excerpts from an interview that I did with Dr. Brad Marshall, the unplugged psychologist. Hello. It's good to have you along for the Happy Families podcast, real parenting solutions every day on Australia's most downloaded parenting podcast. I'm Justin. I'm here with Kylie, my wife and mum to our 6 kids. And Kylie, a couple of days ago, I had a chat with Dr. Brad Marshall. We're going to play the full interview on Saturday so that you can hear all the info. But I thought today we might just have a quick discussion about the things that he and I talked about from a purely parenting perspective, because it was a fascinating conversation and there's more that we can break down. We ran out of time. Dr. Brad Marshall is also known as the unplugged psychologist. We will link to all of his details in the show notes today and on Saturday. But he's recently published a paper. In that paper, he showed what parental interventions do and don't work for effective boundary setting with kids and screens. And I don't know about you, but this is one of those things where you kind of go, let me at it. What don't I know?
Over the years, we've tried lots of different options, and I think I'm right in saying that the best one has been literally parental monitoring.
Yeah, and research over the years has emphasised that very, very clearly. If you are involved, then they are less likely to be on their screens and certainly less likely to do frustrating or damaging things. When I reflect on, so our eldest is in her mid-20s now. So if I reflect on the last 15 years of parenting with her all the way down to our youngest, who is about to turn 11 and who is incessantly requesting, demanding, seeking opportunities to be on screens, I think that the biggest challenge that we've faced in our family, the most enduring and annoying and provocative challenge, has been the issue of screens. Maybe that's minimizing some of the other big things that we've dealt with. We've certainly had some really big challenges, but it's certainly the most enduring issue.
I would agree with you entirely. And I would also acknowledge that in spite of each of our girls being distinctly and uniquely different in every way, shape or form, we have faced this one challenge over and over again, every time, regardless of their differences.
Digital addiction, it's this silent, I was going to say it's a silent epidemic. I think that's understating. And I think that it's pretty noisy in living rooms when parents are saying, would you get off your screen and do as you're told? I'm writing this book about raising boys at the moment, and the number of parents who have said, I just want them to get off their screen and participate in family life, or get off their screen and get involved in school life, or get off their screen and do something
and hang out with their mates.
Yeah. Like, we're not talking about a fringe problem here. These screens are just ravaging children's brains. I feel like it's a full-blown psychological assault on families, on kids' psychology, on their well-being. And when it comes to them, particularly because their brains are in such a sensitive period, internet gaming disorder, smartphone addiction, social media dramas. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. This is a conversation that's so important. Something like 10% of Australian teens are getting their dopamine hits, cheap dopamine hits from their screens instead of life at addictive, compulsive, concerning levels. It's a total generation of kids being rewired.
So you hinted before that Brad's published a paper.
Yeah, research paper, peer-reviewed. It's in journals now.
And it's going to give us the golden key.
Yes.
All the answers we need and to how we deal with this challenge with our teenagers.
5 things. He researched 5 things and looked at how effective they were in setting boundaries with kids. Number one, the most effective thing, managing the home Wi-Fi with set limits.
What does that actually mean in real terms?
That means that you literally set up the Wi-Fi so that the kids can or cannot have access at certain days, certain times, certain whatever. And it's not that complex. It's not a particularly hard thing to do. This is what he had to say about it.
For setting Wi-Fi limits, typically what I talk about is using something called a mesh router system. It allows you to turn on and off certain devices at a macro level without having to turn the entire Wi-Fi off if you don't want to. What fuels all of these devices and their persuasive design and their addictive nature and the dopamine is the Wi-Fi. We know that for a fact. So if the first 2 steps, control your Wi-Fi and control the mobile data, actually had some of the biggest impact that we saw.
I know you said this is really simple, but now I'm confused. What's a mesh router?
So the mesh router system, it's just a form of technology. I'm not an IT guru. I'm not going to explain it effectively, but we have had them at various times in our homes, and it's a way of having the internet available in some places but not other places. So that's an option. There's these things that you can get called in-charge boxes. That's literally, you take the device off your kids, you put them in the box, you lock it up overnight. There's all sorts of different ways. But what he's essentially saying is you control your kids' access to the devices at certain times of the day, especially at nighttime when they're in the bedroom. And all of a sudden you find that they just don't have those problems. I remember one of our friends, Mark, used to go and collect all of his kids. I think Mark and Amy, they had 5 kids. I'm pretty sure they had 5 children. They were all in their teens or somewhere around that age. And Mark used to go around with a big box and pick up all the laptops and all the tablets and all the phones and put them in the box, and they just stayed in his bedroom near his bed. He woke up one morning at 2 o'clock. He could hear something in the bedroom, 2 a.m. Opens his eyes, looks at the clock, hears the sound, thinks, I've got an intruder in my bedroom, flicks on the light, ready to jump at whoever it is that's about to steal everything from their bedroom, and it's their teenage son, Commando, crawling on his elbows across the carpet to get to his screen so that he can play Fortnite at 2 o'clock in the morning. Like, kids really, really want access to their devices. So whether you're doing what Brad's studied or just doing what our friend Mark did, there are ways that you can control the Wi-Fi, minimize access to the Wi-Fi, and therefore reduce your children's time on screens, specifically at set times where you know they don't need to be on their screen.
Like 2 o'clock in the morning.
Like 2 o'clock in the morning. Absolutely.
What's number 2?
So the second one is aligned with that, and that's placing limits on the phone, placing limits on the mobile phone. And that's been typically the route that we've taken.
What I love about this is nothing's set in concrete. The restrictions become fluid because each of our girls needs change from time to time. And as their relationships have matured and their relationships have changed with their friends and the way they communicate with them, sometimes the parental parameters that we've put in place don't actually work for them anymore.
Right. And it's also not fair for the 17-year-old to have the Wi-Fi cut off and for her to not have access to it because the 13-year-old isn't allowed to have it. So having those phone controls can just make a much more personalized filtering approach when it comes to screen access.
But what I love about this approach specifically is that it requires an adult-to-adult conversation.
Yeah.
It requires a willingness to sit in hard places and say, hey, mum, hey, dad, I'm really struggling at the moment because I only get 15 minutes on social media and it's the only way I get to chat with my friends. And by the time we've all kind of worked out what we want to do, my 15 minutes is up and now I don't know where we're meeting or whatever. I love that it makes them accountable where it's going to go next.
And with our children, we've sat down with them maybe on a Sunday afternoon once every, 3 months or every 6 months and said, okay, let's go through the screen time limits. Let's go through the apps that you're allowed and how long you're allowed to be using them and all that sort of thing. And we have found that to be fairly effective. In my interview with Brad, he pointed out that there are some challenges with this.
Parents that are using parental controls on phones and, devices and apps and games, they're incredibly poor. They're poorly designed. There's easy ways to get around them. And, we can go into whether tech companies design them that way on purpose or not.
We've definitely had that one happen.
Kylie, you have limits on your phone and you get around them. Let's be honest. I would never do such a thing.
Oh, never.
I just don't put limits on my phone. After the break, we're going to discuss the other 3 things that Brad has found can be useful in setting clear boundaries for screens and kids in your home. Okay, Kylie, let's hit number 3, setting clear boundaries around Wi-Fi being turned off at bedtime. This was Brad Marshall's 3rd strategy for managing, reducing, controlling, dealing with the challenges that screens present in families. Clear boundaries around Wi-Fi being turned off at bedtime.
So this feels a lot like number 1. I guess the only difference is the entire house's internet is turned off at a certain time frame as opposed to individual devices.
Yeah, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. My challenge here, and I discussed this with Brad a little bit, and obviously I'll replay the whole interview on Saturday. When I chatted with him about this, the real difficulty that we've got is that you turn off the Wi-Fi, and if you're paying for your kid's phone plan, which many parents are, and they're just on a regular phone plan rather than a prepaid with really, really tight limits, the kids will just be like, oh, fine, I'll use my 4G, I'll use my 5G, and that becomes a really big issue. Now, if you've got young children, he recommends, and I'm with him on this, there are phones that are called the G-Me phones. A guy that used to be on Channel 9 as a tech expert, his name is Charlie Brown, literally like the Charlie Brown, that's him. He's developed this phone called the G-Me phone, and we'll link to that in the show notes. I endorse it. I recommend it. It allows parents to set up all of the controls that are required in ways that the kids can't get around them. Like the Apple ones or the Google ones, kids can jailbreak those. These are good controls, and I recommend that. But ultimately, this is essentially saying you don't need the Wi-Fi all the time. You don't need to be connected to your phone all the time. And once again, he found that this is effective. You'll note also that it typically, if it's done well, involves a whole lot of parental involvement and monitoring.
I don't know if this actually comes up in your interview or not, but I think one of the biggest strategies for parents is once you gift your child a phone, that you start off from the very beginning with parameters.
The strictest ones.
Literally.
Absolutely.
Because I think what happens is we all think, oh, my child's not going to be like that. We have no realization of what this device will actually do with our child.
It will absolutely supercharge their brain. It will pull them in, and they are helpless in the face of it. They simply are helpless, especially once you let them, not that any parent should, but once you let them get into Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite, social media, Instagram, TikTok. Oh my goodness. I mean, if there was ever an algorithm that was addictive, this is the absolute pinnacle of it. This is the challenge. And that's again why I like the G-Me phone. It's not a sponsored post. I'm not getting anything out of talk. In fact, I'm going to get Charlie on the podcast and have a chat with him in a couple of weeks because it's so important. And lots of parents are looking at buying their kids' phones right now. You and I recently discussed, do we get our 11-year-old or soon to be 11-year-old a phone? I mean, she's starting to venture a little bit further afield. She's starting to be a bit more adventurous and exploratory. Should we get her a phone? And we don't have a landline in the house anymore. Soon she'll be old enough that we can leave her in the home for an hour or two if we want to step out. Should we get her a phone? We've decided that we're going to go with delay. But eventually she will get a phone, and it will be one that we can absolutely lock down with really rock solid parental controls like the G-Me phone. It's just a really useful option.
What about number 4?
Okay, number 4 is drawing up an agreement with your child about daily screen limits.
I guess that taps in beautifully with what I was saying. Like from the very beginning, there needs to be an agreement, and there needs to be some really, really strict parameters. And then there needs to be accountability, because that's actually probably the missing part.
Correct.
To everything. We all start off with this big kind of ideal of what we want to happen, but then there's no follow through, and our kids work out very quickly that they can push the boundaries.
Spoiler alert, he found that this is not a particularly effective tool. And research over people have been talking about phone contracts for more than a decade now, and the research has consistently shown it's not particularly effective unless there's a high level of accountability. And then you've got to make sure you don't sound like a nag. Like there's work to be done to get that right, but that's number 4.
And number 5?
Implementing consequences. That is, you lose screen time if you break the rules. Now, I'm not big on consequences, as you know, but in the interview that I have with Brad, full replay on Saturday, we're going to really unpack that and talk about why this matters, and some of the things that I have to say about this might surprise anyone who's followed me on Happy Families for any length of time, because I think he's right in this case.
Well, it sounds like it will be a very informative interview on Saturday.
Super practical.
And for any parent who has a screen-aged child in their home, this is probably one you want to earmark, bookmark, whatever.
Maybe even listen to with your kids.
And listen to.
That's on Saturday. The podcast with Dr. Brad Marshall, the Unplugged Psychologist, will drop then. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. If you'd like more information and more resources to make your family happier, please visit us at happyfamilies.com.au.